Hi, Wildling. Hey, I'm still looking for some more interesting guests on European herbalism and foraging. So, if you know anybody that would want to be a guest in my podcast series, please feel free to reach out and contact me through social media, Wild Plant Forager, or through my website, wildplantforager.com. Thank you so much. Welcome to Wild, the podcast for wildlings just like you. Wildlings who want to transform the prevalent plant blindness to collective plant wisdom. My name is Lieve Galle. I've been working as a herbalist and wild plant forager in Belgium since 2002. In those years, I've seen a lot of changes. Working with plants has become more popular, but I've also seen time is running out for our planet. As foragers and herbalists in Europe, sometimes we're dealing with different plant species and different cultural approaches towards plants. In some countries, working with plants is licensed, and in others, it's almost illegal. I believe that together we can learn from one another and be stronger. There is nothing more empowering than connecting wild souls. Together, we can have a greater impact on restoring the ancient link between people and plants. And that's why, for this podcast series, I'm talking to fellow herbalists and foragers in Europe. So if you're ready to find out what you've never been told, but what your soul already knows, welcome to Wild. Hi, welcome to Wild. And today I'm joined by Peter Chippy Grant, a vegan wild chef with Slavic roots based in the UK. He's known for his creative approach to plant-based foraging cuisine, turning overlooked ingredients into culinary magic. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me. Nice to see you again.
So, what is it exactly that inspired you to start foraging?
I guess, being half Slovakian and, growing up, spending every summer there, going to see my grandmother and my grandparents, I would go out into the forest, pick mushrooms, and it was like a treasure hunt, really. And they're kind of some of the earliest like memories I have, and, I remember being made like nettle soup and all these kind of things. I guess I kind of thought it was a little bit normal, really. But then, when I talked to like other kids at school about it, and they were like, "What? That's very weird." um, but yeah, so I think the Slavic roots, I think it's just very normalized there, and that's very much what I've kind of based a lot of the kind of food I do around, those kind of original Slavic roots from when I was a child.
Yeah, so I think it's fascinating that you say that at one point you realized that this was not like a normal thing because people like children in school told you like, "What? What are you doing?" So how did that feel for you? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I guess I kind of just I think that because there was definitely a period where I didn't do that for a while. I definitely there was probably a long period where foraging wasn't a part of my life, and then I think probably after university and really getting back into food, I was like, oh, actually, I remember all these things. I remember making nettle soup and wild garlic and all these kind of things and all these mushrooms and stuff. And yeah, I think it just kind of made me want to like find out more about my past and also just intrigued about the world of herbalism and how plants can heal you, etc. I think great grandmother was like a white witch in this like small Slovakian village. So I don't really have like much. I don't have loads of knowledge about her, but yeah, I know my mum said that, and yeah, so it's quite interesting that I've kind of gone down this path many generations on.
Yes, it's very fascinating. Yes, and I'm wondering, like, you still have family in Slovakia at the moment?
Yeah, I still have family. I've still got some cousins and uncle. My grandparents died quite a while back now, but no, I still have family there. I actually saw my uncle. I hadn't seen my uncle in about 10 years. I saw he came to England the other week, so and we were talking. I was asking lots of questions and stuff, and there was this. We used to have this beautiful cottage by the mountains, and there was a huge forest, dense forest behind that had like
Wow.
all sorts of mushrooms and stuff like that growing, and yeah, it was a very idyllic place. When people ask you that question, where's your like, if you could be in your happy place, I definitely remember that place when I was younger as
Uh-huh.
being my happy place.
So how does your family over there feel about what you're doing now in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix. I think some of them are a little bit disconnected from it now. I think there's also a push and pull in some parts of Eastern Europe, but a bit like probably what was, I feel like there's been a resurgence in the UK, but in places like Eastern Europe, I feel like even though maybe in the villages and towns they do, but I feel like there's maybe a slight looking down on people who do that kind of thing because it's considered to be like something you do if you're kind of poor. But there's also family members like, oh yeah, who just think it's kind of normal as well. I was actually asking, because I think my uncle does have my grandmother's, like, cookbook where she has, like she's, like, lots of notes and, like, paper cuttings and stuff like that. I really would love loved and I've asked it if I could get sent that book because I'd love to, like, have a look through it and, maybe even, like, do a little series of trying to do my old grandmother's recipes because, yeah, I'm just quite intrigued about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. So, it's for me, it's very interesting that you say that. Yeah, in the UK, there's this resurgence of new foragers and new. I mean, it's actually in Belgium as well. It's become like a hipster thing almost. The whole foraging thing. And it's really refreshing to see that in other parts of the world, people think of it as like something more of old fashioned. Like I just interviewed Rebecca Klopath, and she's in Switzerland, also working as a chef, a wild food chef. And she told me that her grandparents just don't understand her because they say, but you don't have to go foraging anymore. You can go to the store and buy everything.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is interesting. I think it can go either way, definitely. I feel like there's definitely some older generation who would feel like it's like, they're above it, but also some just feel like it's just a natural way of life. Guess it might be dependent on class and if you grew up in the villages and the towns and stuff, or rather than the cities. I don't know. I feel like that's probably got something into say with it. And yeah, I mean, again, in the UK, it is kind of considered a middle class hipster kind of thing. However, that's all right if if it's going to get more people involved, if it's trendy, it's not a bad thing to be trendy, right? To be
Hmm.
interested in nature, to be going around the forest, to be, in the woods, because, it's just going back to a way of being before, but you do see those kind of resurgence of, and also with the current political climate and environmental climate and food and it's kind of almost like a necessity that people get kind of a bit more acknowledge that there are these plants out there, these I think we could even I think even like lots of permaculture experts and stuff could probably learn from like actually maybe we should just be growing loads of dandelion because they seem very resilient in any soil
Hmm.
or nettles, and maybe we should be just having that in the supermarkets rather than us trying to grow some sort of genetically genetically modified plant that had come from something like wild mustard or whatever. Maybe I'd think that's probably not a bad thing to maybe think about, and maybe eventually we might have to rely on that.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, and yes, I think it's about resilience as well. And I think foraging gives an answer to many issues in the world that are going on right now. So yes, I don't mind if it's such a hipster thing because yeah, the more people we can get into foraging, if it's done at least in a good way, in a sustainable and safe way, yes, the more the merrier, I would say. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 definitely. I mean, obviously, like you said, it can be done. I mean, and I have I mean, there's actually recently been an article. I think there's some you might have seen it with some newspaper headline. I mean, maybe it was the Daily Mail, but some forager had the police come to their door because they were foraging out there, and it's just like, what? Why is that happening? And like, and she also got a lot of like stick from people saying, "God, don't ruin nature, don't do this, don't do that." And it's like, you're really all these people hating on this person are really putting the hate to towards the wrong people and the wrong systems. You know, they should be really, you know, are there this big industrial farming? You know, why is there all this agricultural farming? Why is there people the fishing industry? You know, all these kind of thing. People making plastic and toxic chemicals and all this, and you know, you're getting angry at someone trying to like pick some plants out in the wild. You know, obviously there are like industrial foraging companies and stuff, and I'm sure there are some practices that, you know, where they go and completely destroy habitats, etc., and maybe like disrupt mycelium. But I would say large and large, most people don't do that, and then those
Hmm.
people who do that, but you know, they're doing it for the complete wrong reasons, aren't they?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yes, this is so. It's really nonsense to blame the foragers for the things that actually the industrial systems are doing. Yeah, exactly.
I think just, you know, I think it's, if anything, it's just like, I think upon maybe, I think it's just like those people have a perceived hate of those people. So, oh, look at them living their alternative lifestyle. And, you know, maybe it's like, oh, maybe it's some bloody hipster, you know, go get a job. I think they've just kind of, they'll bring it up into themselves and it's like a good reason to like actually have some hate towards someone. I think that's what really is the case of it all. You know, I feel like even if they weren't doing foraging, they'd probably complain about something else that that person was
Uh-huh.
doing.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, for me, being a vegan myself, it's very interesting to be on the foraging path, and I have been for a really long time. Because, and I'm sure you've heard the same question as well. People tend to ask you if you don't eat meat or dairy, but what the hell are you eating then? And I always think it's very cool that I can name like 100 local ingredients they have never ever heard of. So, um, how do you see the evolution of wild foods in vegan cuisine?
Yeah, it is interesting, right? Because yeah, I mean, you also get again. I think this is probably something that the dairy industry and the meat industry have kind of come up with. But you get people like just like, oh, you're just eating avocados and almonds and all your, you know, vegan ingredients and your, you know, like, you know, and it's like, yeah, but I don't really eat all that, you know, once in a real blue moon or something. But like, it's like, you know, generally I like to eat like seasonal local food, and I just think it's just maybe it's partly I think I'm quite unjudgmental. You know, if people want to eat meat, I get, you know, and I'm sure, you know, you being a herbalist, and you know, I'm fascinated by herbs and nutrition. That, you know, there are cases, you know, where a girl's on a menstrual cycle and she isn't absorbing maybe some plant based, you know, iron and proteins and whatever. But you know, I can understand that maybe, you know, people, and that's also a cultural thing, right? You know, like, because obviously, you know, I am living in England, you know, where, you know, we have access to shops, and I'm lucky I've got a job that pays me well enough money and stuff. But, you know, if I'm not going to go and preach to someone who's in living in some village in Africa that you shouldn't be eating this goat that you've had. So like, you know, I'm always very cautious about like kind of explaining that. I did have a kind of a bit of a moment, like a few months back, where I was getting kind of interviewed by a friend, and I've actually I'm probably going to end up branding myself under this name eventually, but I kind of thought, you know, I'm like a hunter gatherer, but I'm not the hunter, I'm the gatherer, and I was like, actually, that's quite a good name, the gatherer, because I just kind of thought, you know, also like with a lot of the stuff I do is, you know, there's a lot of ritual around food and, you know, having people together, eating together. So gathering. and also gathering plants and herbs. So I kind of thought that kind of like, I feel like sums me up. I'm like a hunter gatherer, but I'm just a gatherer. I'm not the hunter part. But yeah, I mean, I mean, it's great, also meeting you as well, who's down this part, because yeah, definitely vegans sometimes get, they'll be plastered with like kind of, not being maybe seasonal or local or anything like that. And I feel like that's kind of unfair. Quite often people think if you're seasonal and local, have to be in dairy, you have to be in meat. And I kind of go against that. And also, if we go back throughout the ages, meat would have always been a treat.
Mhm.
And you would have only had dairy or cheese if you had an animal. So, or it might have been traded, but a lot of people would have just survived on grains and plants. So it's not like a weird thing to suddenly be like vegan. It's like a lot of people would have had quite a majority of a vegan diet back in the day.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. One thing I was wondering is, do you remember the very first wild plant or mushroom that you were eating as a child?
So I definitely have a very distinct memory of finding a parasol mushroom in Slovakia and just being like, wow, it looks like a spaceship or something. In my head, it's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger than it probably was, but I remember it being like huge and like, wow. I also, honestly, I mean, as easy as I remember nettles. I also remember just like going on the hedgerows and eating like gooseberries and blackberries and all that kind of stuff as well. And also, I have a memory of my mum picking sorrel and making this kind of sorrel sauce as well. But it's kind of like like a Slovakian recipe. I think traditionally you'd have it with something like eggs or something like that. So yeah, I do. But those are probably the plants I remember most prominently. But
Yeah.
yeah, I also remember stuff like chanterelles and porcini.
Yeah, sorrel is definitely my first memory of a wild food that I was eating. Yeah. So if you're looking at the landscape and you compare the Slovakian landscape to the UK landscape, how much does it differ? Like, yes, when it comes to certain plants that you can find in one place but not in the other, or is it pretty similar, or
I would,
landscape elements that are different?
yeah, definitely elements that are different. I mean, I've got to admit, I haven't been. I've been around a lot of Eastern Europe. I've worked out in Bulgaria and Poland and was in Slovenia doing a little film last summer. And yeah, so I spent a lot of time in I was in Romania last year as well, but I actually haven't gone back to Slovakia in a while. I think I'm definitely due a trip, and it's definitely going to happen. But to my memory, it is definitely probably more biodiverse. I definitely think there are more different types of flowers and plants and mushrooms just because there's more woodlands. I think actually, I
Mhm.
think I remember I can't quote the exact statistic, but I think is a very high, I think Slovakia is one of the highest number of like ratio per like where cityscape towards like woodlands and like nature areas is quite high in the percentages of like being one of the most like diverse with like, trees and forest land. I think maybe Poland was the most, I have a feeling, but I think Slovakia was up there in the top five or something. And I think in the opposite, I think England was maybe one of the worst. I think even though we've got some very ancient woodlands, they keep on getting chopped down, and obviously more and more people. I mean, we're quite a small island, but we have something like nearly 70 million people living here, right?
Mhm.
Um, what is actually um, quite cramped compared to some other countries in Europe and in the world. I mean, think about somewhere like Australia. It's as big as Europe, and it's got like 24 million people.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Mhm.
so I would imagine, and I just remember even from like the types of insects, because I was quite, I mean, I was also really fascinated by insects when I was younger. I remember lots of different types of butterflies, stag beetles, and stuff that are maybe near less extinct in the UK. and like praying mantises, what you don't get in the UK. So that would make me lead.
Right.
That would make me lead to think that there was probably more different types of plants and mushrooms and stuff out there, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you're saying here because to me, the UK is so much more biodiverse than Belgium already. So
Mm.
reference point is everything. And actually, I've never been to any of the other countries you mentioned, so I cannot compare. But it's very interesting to see, and also it has to do, I think, with Belgium being so densely populated. So that's definitely a thing that has its effect on the landscape. It's yeah, it's logical when you think about it. Yeah, yeah, less room for nature and more, yeah, more people.
I think so. I think also, yeah, I think, a lot of these Eastern European countries, they've come out of a Cold War, out of communism, and
Hmm.
a lot of I know, I've talked to some of my, my Romanian friend, and I'll talk to my mum and stuff, and a lot of the supermarkets were just kind of quite empty. So, like, they'd go to all these supermarket and there'd be a lot of the same thing, just shelf and shelf and shelf and just shelves that were completely empty. And it was a very common theme from talking, and I've also got a Ukrainian chef friend, Olia, and she also says exactly the same thing. So I think there was a very natural kind of yeah, like people would just go out and just forage, because I think they had to all survive off their land. I mean, even when I go around Eastern Europe today, I remember going around Slovenia, and like so many people just have allotments just in their gardens, or like you'd be growing stuff, or have a hedgerows with berries or apple trees or something like that. So yeah, I think therefore it is kind of like people are just more used to surviving off nature. I
Hmm.
remember also last year going to a Romanian market, and everything there is just, everything you buy there is pretty much seasonal. It is like whatever's in season. And also, it's something I've seen people just, selling random herbs, sea buckthorn, nettles, like literally bunches of nettles being there. And also in my memories of being in like Bulgaria as well, people quite often, unless you go to some very posh market in London, you might find some like porcini or something like that, very extortionately priced, I may add, and probably maybe not from the UK. But like, quite often I'd see some like, bupkas, some like grandmas on the side of a road just selling, whatever mushrooms they found and stuff. And there's something really quite enchanting and amazing about that, and it's, someone's actually gone to the effort to like find these things. And, also you're getting something that's probably very fresh, something that hasn't been stored in some warehouses for months or been
Hmm.
sprayed on, or so yeah, I would think Eastern Europe is, yeah, I think it's just the way, maybe by accident, because of communism and them being so poor, have ended up being a bit more linked to nature and having more areas of nature as well.
Wow, that sounds really fantastic. The babkas at the side of the road selling mushrooms. Lovely, lovely image. So, are there any like traditional foraging techniques or preserving techniques from Slavic countries that you think more people should be knowing about?
Ooh, I mean, I think there's a lot of pickling and a lot of fermenting. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, as you'd probably presume, right? Because you when you think of some of these countries, like Poland, or you think of like stuff like sauerkraut and stuff like that. So yeah, I think those are probably the ones that, but also a lot of drying of herbs as well. I think they definitely would be like tying stuff up, by a window or outside when it's sunny, drying various herbs to make teas and stuff like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything maybe slightly unconventional, but I can't. I think those are the ones that I can think of in my head.
And I hear you speaking about herbs. Do you think also the medicinal use of herbs is more common in Slavic countries. Yeah.
I mean, again, if you think about it, maybe, Western medicine's only been around for about 200 years or whatever, like normal pharmaceutical medicine. So, and obviously it's probably gone to the richer countries first, right? So I imagine in some like Slovakian villages or Romanian stuff, they'd have to go back to what I like to refer to as the original medicine, but is like herbs and plants, and again, I remember when, growing up with my mum, I remember me and my brother once putting a hose pipe down a hornet nest and getting stung like all over. What was very, very stupid of us. and
Oh.
remember getting stung all over. And I remember my mum cutting an onion and just like putting it back on the sting. And even to this day, I remember, constantly having like sprained ankles and stuff like that. And my mum always getting loads of vinegar and just covering my sprained ankle with that. So yeah, I think just, and even to be honest, I didn't even really think of them as just like, herbal medicines or anything like that or anything unusual. It was just quite what my mum did. And I don't think she thought of it as anything different. But looking back, I was like, oh yeah, these are kind of like little remedies and stuff like that. And so answer to your question, again, I think people just had to rely on that, kind of stuff,
Mhm.
I don't think I don't think they had access to, to pharmaceutical medicines or being able to go to a chemist or whatever. I feel like they would have and relied on all these kind of plants and vegetables and fruits and, even vinegar.
Yeah. And one thing I'm also wondering is, so you work as a chef. Sometimes you work as a private chef, as a retreat chef. How do people react generally when they see that you're working with wild ingredients?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely think people are coming a bit more attuned to it, right? However, definitely at the first, people, I think the classic thing is like, oh God, did dog a dog piss on that or something like that. Some people you still get that a little bit. I mean, even weirdly enough, my dad is very much like that. And if I bring back like some like mushrooms or something from the woods, and even as weirdly because my mum has done it throughout her whole childhood, my dad being English, he's a bit like, oh God, no, no. And I think there's a lot of fear around
Mhm.
mushrooms. Though but I think that's maybe an older generation in England because I feel like, or I mean, we've probably been told as kids or like, watch out for that or whatever. Even though, like,
Don't even touch it. Don't even touch it. Yeah.
yeah. And it's not about being fearful, is it, of nature? It's about respecting it, about learning it. It's the same. For example, if you're gonna drive a car, you're not gonna just like straight away just go in and just like drive off somewhere, are you? You're gonna learn about it, and it's the same with like anything in life. Everything has a potential risk, I'm sure, but it's about learning about it. And it's the same with like mushrooms. I haven't ever poisoned myself with mushrooms, and hopefully, hopefully I won't ever will. But it's you have to be careful about all these things. But that's why I've gone on countless foraging walks with other foragers, and that's why we're part of all these foragers associations, part of all these groups and stuff like that. That's why if you're fascinated about something, you will you know make the extra effort to learn. So
Yes, and it's in fact by learning more about these specific things that we can make the risk lower, not by just staying away from it and not knowing anything about it. But I strongly believe in the more information you have, the more wise choices you can make.
definitely, I agree.
And did you ever think about working in a restaurant with wild plants and mushrooms?
I mean, I have had my time of working in a few kitchens and restaurants and stuff like that. Admittedly, this was a while back now, so I don't know. I feel like maybe people have changed their kind of opinion on stuff like that. Quite often you will see, I think it's again, it's kind of becoming a bit trendy to have. And also, I think, with the boom of mushrooms, you're like, back, even like over five, maybe like 7 years ago, I'd say, before COVID kind of times, the idea of having something like maitake or lion's mane on a menu would be like, what the hell is that? Like, and people would, and it wouldn't be something you'd be easily available. But nowadays, it's quite on a lot of fine dining menus, you will see maitake or lion's mane, almost guaranteed, almost to the point where I'm sometimes like, when I'm like, coming up with a meal for, because I do quite a lot of supper clubs and stuff like that, or like banquet kind of type thing. I'll be like, well, do I want to do this again? Because it seems like to be very much out there, Um,
Mhm.
but that's great. It is good. It's a good thing, It's good to show and harness the power of mushrooms. It's great. There's been this resurgence, but I still do think there's some people who are a bit fearful of it, and definitely of the idea of like wild mushrooms. But I feel like,
Mhm.
yeah, definitely there's a bit of a tide changing, right? But that's definitely something, in Eastern Europe, and that there doesn't seem to be any fear around it. It just seems to be very like normalized, and actually it's quite funny because a lot of the time they won't even know the name of a mushroom. They'll just be like, oh, they'll call it under like the oak mushroom, or the brown top, or but with chanterelles, as they call them, like in Slovakia they call them little chicks. I think in Slovenia they call them foxes, like little foxes, and I can't remember, somewhere else they call it some other little. Oh, I think it's might be right, but maybe in Poland they call it little squirrels. And it's funny, they call them little woodland animals, wherever you are. So it's, but a lot of the time, in these, I mean, we have a lot more, knowledge out there that we can get, just easily available. But maybe in Eastern Europe isn't as easily available, but there's isn't such a fear around mushrooms. It's quite interesting, that paradox.
So, as a chef, you have your wild ingredients, you have your own creativity, and then you turn them into a dish. And I'm wondering what at the moment gives you, apart from, of course, nature itself, gives you inspiration? Like, do you have some other chefs, foragers that you are reading books on, or I don't know, YouTube channels, whatever? What inspires you?
Cool, that's it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the people who are part of the Foragers Association are quite inspiring, to be honest, as you very well know. I mean, I
Hmm.
I recently finished Monica Wild's audiobook, The Wilderness Cure. Have you read or listened to it yet?
Yes, yes, I have read it. Yes.
And yeah, that's
Yeah,
amazing. Like that, I mean, she's very inspiring. Um,
absolutely.
I mean, a lot of the stuff that Fergus the Forager as well that does. I mean, he was the first person to do the like kind of like the chocolate jelly ear thing, but it's like quite done quite often now by all foragers. But I think he was the first to do it. Here, and also, I mean, he was on a podcast I think called the Mushroom Hour, and I remember him just talk how he got into loving foraging and mushrooms and all that was quite similar to mine. It was like going out, I think, with his like grandparents or something like that, and I think he was quite fascinated by insects, what was kind of quite similar to mine. So yeah, I mean, I do find the stuff he does quite inspiring. I mean, chef wise, a friend of mine actually, I went to his restaurant the other day. It's called Kirk, and I mean, I wouldn't say he's so much on the side of foraging, but he's a vegan chef, and he won this program on like English television called Great British Menu. And he was the first vegan chef to ever win it, or even like kind of get into the finals of it. So,
Wow.
and he got some of the highest scores. And yeah, I mean his food. And I actually went to his restaurant the other day, and his food is absolutely unbelievable. Like he is. the stuff he does, the flavors, the textures, it is like wow. It is not. I honestly think it's the best food I've ever had. Like he is very, very talented. If you ever come to the UK again, you should 100% go there. He's a very nice guy. He's very like, yeah, very open-minded, very it's also quite a small restaurant. It's not too pretentious, even though, the food standard is extremely high. But yeah, I definitely find the work he does very inspiring. Yeah, who else? God, there's count. I mean, a lot of friends as well, and yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I'm sure there's probably people I've missed. Um,
Take your time to think.
um, yeah, I mean, it's a combination, and especially also like, a lot of herbalists and stuff as well. I'm always very inspired by. I definitely want to go down that route a bit more, and I think eventually study herbalism. Obviously you met Julie and Matt, you know, v-
Yes.
um, uh, and they're a lovely couple, and they wrote the book, Hedgerow Herbalism, what's quite a famous book amongst herbalists and
It's a
foragers
very
alike.
good book. Yeah.
It's a very good book, and they're just the most lovely, down to earth, real humans who, I was, very lucky to have gone up and stayed with them. Hopefully, we'll be doing it in the next few months again, actually. But they have such a wealth of knowledge, and it is like just truly inspiring just to like talk to them, and they're just so open to like sharing that knowledge, and in a very like, sometimes people act in a way like they know it all, but they're really amazing people. And they actually have a little cookbook as well, but some of the recipes I've actually used as well. Also, Kat, obviously, who's doing all the fermenting as well. I actually got her book as well. I'd recommend. Obviously, it's not all vegan, but I mean, some of her processes and stuff is quite out there. But I mean, great, amazing flavor combos. Yeah, obviously, I'm friends with the guys from Bristol Fungarium. They very much got me into medicinal mushrooms. Yeah, really lovely people. Do things the right way. They use a lot of like localized strains, and obviously people like Merlin Sheldrick, who I'm
Mhm.
lucky to have met a few times. A very lovely man. Obviously, his book Entangled Life is one of them. Have you read that?
No, I haven't. It's on my reading lists.
It's good. It's also a good audio book. He's got a very lovely, deep voice. He's a lovely man as well. Really a good laugh. Very funny. Yeah, obviously Paul Stamets as well. He's someone who's, yeah, one of the people who I think I remember. He had a book called Mycelium Run-ins, but I probably must have found out about 12 years ago. And I remember a friend of mine saying, "Oh, this book's really cool," and he was, and there's mushrooms that can eat like nuclear waste, and mushrooms that you can make like, shoes and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, that sounds pretty out there and cool. And I remember reading that book and being like, wow, mushrooms are just like they could save the world. I was like very much
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's weird because I mean, I'm definitely am inspired by some chefs, but I think I'm also inspired by, yeah, like I said, like herbalists and foragers and people doing stuff on mushrooms. And sometimes I will use some of those elements within, because I definitely like to, because I do a lot of retreats was very around wellness. So yeah, I do like to have a holistic approach with the kind of food and drink I do.
Well, thank you for all these. Well, it's like a whole treasure chest of inspiration that you just shared with us. So thank you
It's
so much for that. How do you see like using wild foods as ingredients in mainstream cuisine in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? How is that going to evolve, you think?
I I think it's well, I think it's one of those things, isn't it? I feel like people are definitely going to use it more and more just because people are going to be open to it. And it's one of those things that there's the pessimist in me that I feel like people getting greedy, that I could see it suddenly, people being like, oh yeah, like I can make, these things are free. I can make a lot of money from that. And people then exploiting nature. I mean, it's like anything, like if you think about it, it's like the dairy industry. Oh, there's probably nothing in theory. I mean, I wouldn't do it, but like, if someone's just like has their own cow and they're milking it and getting some milk from it, to and then if someone's like, oh, that's good, actually, I'll get milk, I can sell that, and then people trying to monopolize and make money from it. So there is a danger, I guess, that people some people getting greedy and doing that because they can see it's a trend and people like that thing. Hopefully, what I think would be better is that people, and the ideal, from a positive aspect, is that there's more people rewilding their land, rich people and people with big estates being like, actually, I'm just going to have loads of wildflower seeds here, or actually, I'm going to leave nature to do its thing. Hopefully, that will just give more places of nature that, and more like food, stuff like food forest, and
Mhm.
hopefully people can think of it from a sustainable angle that is actually helping nature rather than trying to like make money from it. But yeah, it's one of those things. I feel like it could kind of go either way.
Yes, I hear you on the more rewilding. By all means, let's do that. But I also hear you about the danger, the hidden danger that is actually there. I think our economical model is based on scarcity, and then you have this natural abundance that you can find in nature. And I could even, a couple of years ago when we lived in another place, we were a member of a CSA farm, and so we had to pick our own vegetables and berries. And I remember the farmer saying, if people are a member for the first year, they're always over harvesting because, they get this message, oh, this week you can harvest this and this and this vegetable and this and this and this berry. And he said, I just see them harvesting all of these things, and I know that they will never eat them in 1 week. So, and he said, yeah, it's normal. It is because our economical model is based on scarcity, and it's just what people do if they find out that something is for free. Yeah. So I think it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there would have to be some like kind of, maybe it might be one of those things. I mean, I don't really want it to go that way, but it could be one of those things that if people if it does become an issue, and obviously the fact that, there's been a newspaper article about it, then maybe foraging has a bit more. I mean, I think, am I right that foraging has a lot of guidelines in Belgium? Um,
Hmm.
Not really much. I mean, I think the only thing is you can't dig up roots, and you have to do it, and long as and also if it's not private land, right?
Hmm.
But pretty much you can go and, I think it's the 4 Fs, isn't it? I think it's fungi, flora, fruits, yeah, fruits, and it'll come to me at some point. But yeah, but you know what I mean by that. Pretty much, you can go and pick anything, as long as it's not like private land, and as long as you're not uprooting a plant. But those are the
Hmm.
kind of things you can't do. But it could be if it does, you know, become an actual issue. I don't think right now it is an issue, and
Hmm.
I think people want to make it an issue. A lot of the plants that I will pick en masse are stuff like nettles and dandelions and, specific wild garlic spots were just a massive abundance. And
Yes,
me
and
picking the
if you're speaking of nettles and dandelions, it's just like a regenerative food, right? I
yeah,
mean, it just
yeah,
keeps
yeah,
growing back anyway. So yeah.
yes, yes. So that's the thing, I feel it could be a thing that it gets a bit more like, oh, you're only allowed to take a certain amount, or you can't take certain plants, or, there might be certain areas you can't do it in, or that could happen, or you might need like a proper license to forage, things like that. And I know the Foragers Association, or the Association of Foragers, I'd say, are thinking about maybe they are trying to get some sort of blueprint of having some sort of like, you have to do some sort of like test or something to be able to.
Really?
I think mainly they're doing that. Also, don't quote me on this. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I remember talking to Mark the main reason they're doing that is maybe to do it before the governing bodies and stuff pressure them will come up with something themselves. What does make
Mm-hmm.
sense, if you can
It does.
uh, if you can organize it yourself before some other governing body who has not a clue about foraging comes and does it, it might look good. And then, let's say 5 or 10 years down the line, some government officials, oh, well, someone's died from foraging, or, someone's, poisoned someone or whatever. Something comes out, some awful thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It would be good if a foragers association is like, well, actually, we've got this whole thing, people have to go through this whole test and blah, blah, blah. So in some ways, it could be saving your own back to do something like that now. Although I know a lot of foragers, and me included, and I'm sure the same, is that there's a bit of anarchism in us. Like, oh, we don't want to be bloody doing some tests. I don't have to be told what to do. But a lot of the reason why I didn't join this association of foragers, like, I don't want to be a part of some association. I don't want to be part of some club telling me what I can and can't do, but actually realized it was a lovely, wonderful community of people who are very like-minded and have great conversations and amazing knowledge. So I feel like there's a bit of resistance to doing something like that, but there definitely could be a positive to doing towards something like that.
Yes, it's a very interesting approach, I think, because obviously you always have people doing it in a good way, and then you'll always have the cowboys as well. You know what I mean? I actually have been thinking about this myself in Belgium because there is like a fishing permit, so you can go out and fish in certain areas, but you need to have a fishing permit. And I think, yeah, like in some areas it may be a good idea. Like in Belgium, it's forbidden to forage in nature reservations, which I can totally understand. But then again, they are mowing down like the nettles and everything else, or they are using grazers, like large grazing animals. And I think, well, we could be grazers too, we could just pick the nettles instead of you having to mow them, or we could, it would be an interesting approach to think about. But I'm not sure at the moment it's something that could even be discussed in Belgium, at least. So it's interesting to hear that the Association of Foragers is also thinking a little bit like this. Yeah.
Well, like I said, don't 100% quote me, but I think from what I remember gathering, and maybe one of our, when there was a lot of conversations about weekend, but I feel that that is something that has been considered. I'm not saying they're doing it or anything, but I mean,
It's just an idea. Yeah.
even if it isn't, if it is something that they haven't said, I think it is a good thing to consider because
Yeah.
and if you are a good and experienced forager and you know your plants and stuff, you should be fine. And also, if you don't,
Hmm.
if you're a bit worried, then you'll have to try and learn it. So it's not a
Hmm.
bad thing
Hmm.
in some ways. And
Exactly. Yeah.
and like I said, before some other, and also it made me think about, especially after this, article about this girl going out mushroom foraging. I feel like, I feel like maybe, there, and there was quite a few around last autumn. There was a few things about like deadly death cap and like there's a lot of like mad satirical crazy headlines from tabloid crappy newspapers in the UK. So you do wonder if there's a bit of an agenda there or something starting to happen because the
Hmm.
fact that you know there's been a few things, and previously I don't think I'd ever seen anything really about. And but so yeah, it does make me think. Make me think if
Yeah, I actually heard from one of my students last year that she was talking about how, well, there's a hedgerow where she forages, and she said, yes, there is a lady with a dog, and don't get me wrong, I love dogs, but she said she has actually she contacted the city government, because there was Gelder rose and elderberries growing there, and she was afraid that her dog would get poisoned. And she really asked the city government to take down the Gelder rose and elderberry bushes, which is just crazy. I mean, there is no way you can I mean, nature is nature. Nature just is, you know? We have to deal with plants and know which ones are safe and know how we can prepare them safely. But there is no point in, I mean, if it's like, okay, if it's like a kindergarten area, I can understand that if you plant things there that you choose non-toxic plants. I can totally understand that. But like in the wild, there is no way you can be like speciesist and say, hey, we allow these species and these species we don't. It's such a crazy idea, really, that we can control nature for our own safety, so called.
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, that does sound absolutely like bonkers or crazy. And there's also it's just like just very like it just sounds someone who's very entitled and like not thinking like, oh, actually those berries could be used for some animal might be some birds and stuff might be eating on those.
Exactly.
It's just like and like you don't know what bees might be going on the flowers. When it's absolutely balmy and like crazy and like quite self-centered to think that oh actually my or your dog as well. It's like these are like especially with elderberries. Like I'm just thinking. I mean, I guess maybe they fall down, but like but like a lot of the time they're up in trees. Like how is that? It is quite, what's your dog gonna climb up that tree? And I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it's also like this thing you already mentioned, this fear for the wild, because maybe this person has a garden and has a tomato plant in their garden, and they don't know that the foliage is actually toxic to their dog. So it's really this underlying, yeah, fear for wild nature. I don't know where it comes from, but it's a very interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the thing that people need to be a bit more. We need to be working with nature, not against it. We need to
Hmm.
be. I mean, I generally believe, and I've said this before, and it's that, we should be guardians of humans in ideal circumstance. Why, if you're getting spiritual about it, why if people will say, why are humans on Earth? And it's probably to protect and be guardians of nature and this planet, not to be like fighting against it, to like, destroying it, to polluting it, to I mean, God, our rivers and stuff like that, especially in the UK, our rivers. I think there's some famous Olympic athlete who I think won loads of golds, but he was saying, and he's a rower. He was called Steve Redgrave, and he said a lot of his friends would be have been like rowing in the rivers and been getting all these weird illnesses and disease because of like like falling in and splashing back water and whatever and ingesting it or going, and it's just like why that should not be happening. Why are
Hmm.
what has happened? Why what it's absolutely, yeah, it's very sad to hear, and we really, but obviously there's a positive spin that, there are people do realize that things are happening. There's people like, us, and there's lots of, eco activists and, beekeepers and, sustainable growers and farmers who, have gone more to the green side of the world and like, but are, wanting to change and rewild
Hmm.
the world and work with nature and protect it. So obviously it is easy to be doom and gloom, but because of sometimes things need to get quite bad to people be like, oh, actually, we really need to sort this out. So hopefully there's a counter resistance to a lot of the bad things that the humans are doing in the world.
Yes, and I think foraging is such an important element in that because it's like a gateway, pulling people into, really making that connection to nature and caring about it because they start to know it and to realize how much they are part of the ecosystem themselves.
Yeah, 100%. If you forage over a number of years, you get very much aware of like the seasons and when plants are around, and also you get very, like they become like your friends, don't they? Plants like, oh, this elderflowers out again. It must be this time of year, and it is nice. You get very in tune with nature and the way it kind of it just is a part of us and life, So yeah, I think foraging does make you very hyper aware of it being around. And also, it also makes you, I've definitely gone to some beautiful areas were once beautiful, and now they've become like houses or stuff like that, or just been completely destroyed. So it makes you even more like, oh wow, there was some beautiful like rare like plants there, or some mushrooms I used to get there. So it does make you very much really appreciate it and very grateful for all the amazing things that it's given to us, all the
Mhm.
medicines, all the nutrients, and all the kind of insect life, and the flowers, the smells, the multi-sensory experience of nature. So I think foraging is I think you said it right. It is a gateway. You're right. It's a very much well, when you start getting into foraging, it opens your eyes, and plants you didn't realize what were always there, you realize, and you're like, wow, what's that, and what's that. I like running, but I definitely think as more and more I've got into foraging, my runs are very like, oh, I'll stop, and I'll be like, oh my God, look, there's this, or was like, oh, it's a chicken of I mean, I know once and oh, it's a chicken of the woods on that log there. But also sometimes it can be as a good thing. Like sometimes I'll be like, I'm gonna run or cycle to this place because I know there's some, it's like a treat to yourself, like, oh, it's like
Mhm.
rather than having like some crappy chocolate bar or something, you'd be like, oh, I'll run to this place and I will find some mushrooms or whatever. I mean, I've done it recently. There's a lot of magnolia out at the moment, and
Mhm.
the other day I saw this big magnolia tree that wasn't in someone's estate. It was just like off the road somewhere, and I was like, wow, like that's quite rare because a lot of the time they seem to be in people's houses and whatever.
Mhm.
So I was like, and I literally I cycled to this spot a few times and got all these magnolia petals, and loads of them have just fallen down, and picked them up, and yeah, I made a magnolia like hydrosol.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Nice.
it's amazing. Oh yeah, it's kind of like a bit orangey, a bit gingery. Yeah, I'm gonna maybe use it for some drinks, also just for a little spritz. Like I said, it's great to, it really makes you get really excited about nature as well. What I think's um
Mhm.
was great, and I think, it's one of those things I feel like would be such a beneficial thing for kids to just, learn at school, just like, oh, let's go the day out and learn how to forage and like just get intrigued by nature. Kids love a treasure hunt, and we also love immersive stuff. So it's such a great way to learn. And also, you can learn about, how plants grow, chlorophyll, all that kind
Mhm.
of stuff as well.
Yes, absolutely. So, if there was one wild plant that you could introduce to every kitchen, which one would it be?
I could go like some like mad, like fancy plant, but I just think nettle. I just think it's sustainable. It's a it's a multivitamin. It's got like vitamin K. It's got iron. It's got potassium. It's got vitamin C. It's fully like very nutritional. It's also, you can use the seeds. The seeds are, I mean, you probably know, are really good for like as a adaptogenic purposes. The root is good for like male hormone stuff, and prostate, all that kind of things. So it's just one of those plants, and you can use it in a number of different ways. You can juice it, you can make it into a soup, you can make it into a pesto, you can use it, um, you know, in a pie. You could use it, like a spanakopita or something like that, or you know, it's and it's just abundant, and for most people, they wanna get rid of it, and it's absolutely, it's really easy to identify.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I just think, I'm sure some people would say something maybe a bit more sexy and exciting, but I just think nettles are great, I think something that and I think there's nothing wrong with something that is just easy to identify, abundant, and yeah, I've definitely seen people before be like, "Oh, you're gonna say nettle," rather than, like some like interesting type of mushroom, or something like that, or, some really
Exactly.
weird herb that no one's really heard of, it's very rare. But yeah, no, I think really easy. I think nettle. What about you?
I love your answer, and I think I would answer the same because stinging nettle is so versatile. You can use it in like sweet dishes and but also hearty dishes. It's just so versatile, and it's regenerative. It just keeps growing back, and really, it should be more of a staple in mainstream kitchen, I think, because it's so accessible and it's growing anywhere. And as you said, easy to identify. You're not going to mix up it with anything else. You can identify it in the dark. It's if it stings, it's stinging nettle. So yeah, I really like the idea of stinging nettle as a more mainstream ingredient in kitchens. Yeah, let's make that happen.
I think so. I think so. I mean, like I said, like in Eastern Europe, it's very much already a thing, and I'm sure. I think also other parts of Europe as well. I feel like maybe somewhere like France, and even in France, and weirdly enough, I do really think France and Germany, they are a little bit more attuned, especially with like especially with like Germany with herbal medicine stuff. They're quite. Um, I do wonder why that's the case, but another thought for another day, maybe. But I think nettle really, and probably second, maybe something like dandelion, because I feel like again that's a really easy one to herb. Also, you know, again has lots of different benefits. Also, again, you can use the root for something different. You can use the
Mhm.
leaf. You can use the flowers. Um, yeah, and I think that's something great. But you know, if it's a multifaceted plant, but you can use different parts of it at different times of the year.
Yes. Yes, and the flavors are so different, like the root and the flowers, it's just completely different flavors. So that's really nice to have that all in like one plant. So yeah. Yeah, I like that. So, Chippy, if people want to find out more about your work and what you are doing, where can they find more information?
Well, I mean, in the midst of probably a bit of a rebrand at the moment, and hopefully getting like a new website and stuff like that. But at the moment, it's just my Instagram. That's probably my Instagram's probably the best way. I mean, I also do have a Facebook, but yeah, those are probably the best two ways to find out what I'm up to while website development. And like I said, I might be possibly changing my name soon to maybe the Gatherer down the line. I'm in the process of like I said, I went to Slovenia last year, and there was we did like a little film with like an old school kind of Super 8 camera, so it's like an analog camera, and that will be coming out. And I think with that, I'll probably rebrand. It's kind of a start of that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's how to get hold of me.
So thank you so much for your time and this really interesting conversation that we had. I'm really very
Yes,
grateful
yeah, it
that
flowed
we
very
had this
well.
talk. Yes, and yes, keep up the good work and see you around as the gatherer. I really like that name. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you for your questions and your conversation. Very good conversation. And yeah,
You're welcome.
hopefully see you soon. Yeah, keep on doing your good work, your podcast and stuff. Thank you so much.
Well,
And yeah, all the best. And yeah, lots of love.
yes, and for you, Wildy, that has been listening, thank you also to you for listening to this episode. Hope to see you for the next one. And in the meantime, keep powdering your nose with dandelion pollen. Bye bye. A warm thank you for listening, Wildy. Are you feeling a wild itch after this episode? Well, just head over to wildplantforager.com and feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm looking forward to the next episode. I hope you'll be there. But for now, just go outside and follow your wild heart.